It was a shocking moment for anyone who knew us as a couple to hear the words Adara, my wife of over 16 years, said in the presence of our family and friends who had thrown a surprise party for her to celebrate some of her achievements. The indirect glances I caught at me were astounding, for most were wondering how I would react to Adara's words. I didn't really care, for I had only recently learned of this. I figured that with the changes she had made in her life that did not concern me, it was only a matter of when or where she would publicly announce the end of our marriage. Despite the fact that I hadn't seen her in the flesh in over 6 months, Adara looked good. After missing her birthday due to a virus blockage, it was noticeable that she had lost weight and had dropped about 20 pounds. In her 36 years, Adara still possessed a height of 5 feet 8 inches that made many men linger on her. Tara, her longtime best friend and soon to be her latest enemy, walked over to where I was sitting. It was quite noticeable to most of those present that my wife and I had not spoken to each other since her arrival. Every time I approached my wife, she would deliberately turn her back to me and walk away. Even the quest participants kept their distance from me because of such a public display. I was now an untouchable that no one was supposed to talk to. She was, in her own way, sending a message to everyone, and they picked up on it. Nevertheless, Tara walked over to my daughter and me and hugged me in a naturally friendly gesture. "Who is this woman we're dating, Ray?" Tara asked with a knowing smile. Making sure everyone present could hear her. "A newfound trendsetter in the world of globetrotters who has no idea what's going on in reality," I replied. "Adara thinks she's in complete control of the situation, but has no clue whatsoever." "I have you to thank for that," Tara said quietly. "Now that we see the whole picture through different eyes, we realize how she used her ways to play her games. I'm going to savor watching her get her ultimate reward. We have a lot of catching up to do. I thought you were going to smile about what's going to happen. I know I am smiling." "Tara, I promise you I'll be in the moment," I said. "The appearance that I don't understand anything should persist for a while longer. I want what happens to come as a complete surprise. By the end of the night, everyone will realize that I'm not the hapless husband she makes me out to be. Just remember that I'll be busy for the next few days dealing with the aftermath of tonight's events." "I guess I just can't wait to get it over with, which explains why you look like you're trying to figure it all out," Tara said. "If only we had known before what we know now, things would be very different." Tara was right, and not only that. The problem was that sometimes you have to wait for the knowledge to come. Tonight, one way or another, the relationship between Adara, Tara, and me would change forever. "Ray, I told Tina during a long conversation before we came here who you are and why things are the way they are," Tara said with a smile. "I prepared everything so that the two of you could sit together at dinner. Through what is about to happen, we will be free from the bonds of the past." I'd glimpsed Tina over the years when we'd been dating. Looking at her anew, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Tina was breathtakingly beautiful, just like her mother. We struck up a conversation about what she planned to do with her life after graduation, and I learned that she was majoring in drafting and design, which thrilled me. Over dinner, Tina tactfully asked questions that I fully expected her to ask. By the time dinner was over, we both realized that each other was comfortable with our changing relationship. Tina was growing up an only child, and as soon as things settled down after the events of that evening, a whole bunch of relatives would enter her world. I couldn't help but wonder how Adira and my three would take the news that they had a half-sister they didn't know about. Funny how that truth wouldn't have come out if Adira hadn't done what she did. Next chapter. I was surprised when her father reported that Adira, his pride and joy, had finally received permission from government officials in Australia to fly home after the 6-month quarantine was lifted. Once she landed in New York, she had to undergo tests and was quarantined again for 2 weeks until she was given a positive report on her health. There was no way the state and city could work things out between themselves and ended up complicating things. On Friday afternoon, she boarded a small private plane for her final flight to our regional airport. Flying with her was Jesse, her right-hand man. They had worked together for most of the last 4 years. They arrived just in time for the formal dinner and dance. Since we were both busy with our careers, no one knew what was going on behind closed doors, and that's what we wanted. And 4 years later, our world changed abruptly. Her father, having joined the board of directors, turned over management of the day-to-day operations to a new CEO and president, his oldest daughter, who became my wife. By far, in his opinion, the rewards were top-notch. Under her leadership, things have gone from strength to strength. The conglomerate had not had such good results for many years. Since she had taken over the company, the growth had been amazing. Their greatest competitors have been hurt by the new programs she has introduced. Our 3 children, with the help of my wife's parents, rented a medium-sized conference room at our favorite club that we were all members of. They enlisted the club's restaurant staff to prepare and serve dinner. A bar was also set up since all expenses were written off as business. Since there were no viral restrictions in the area, everyone invited came to the dinner. There were about 50 to 60 people attending the private event, in addition to family members who were considered elite in the business world. It was all very festive because it was both a welcome home, a belated birthday party, and a celebration of how well the conglomerate had done. A private limo delivered Adara and Jesse right to the venue as soon as she stepped out of the airport after the last flight home on her last business trip. We had rented it for the evening, so I knew the luggage she brought with her would be available to her when she left. When they cornered me with the idea, I was all for it, but none of them could figure out why. The fact that I agreed to it without being convinced puzzled them because it went against everything I had ever done. After all, everyone knew that I was the only family member who didn't like big events and often refused to attend most of them because I never felt like I could fit in. Over the past 10 years, everyone could count on the fingers of one hand how many events I had attended. My problems in this area stemmed from the insecurities I had carried around since childhood. Those who knew my life path could see how they affected everything. As a result, to this day, I never felt comfortable around those who had power, influence, and money. And yet I walked among the elite of our society, blending in with them as if I belonged to them. Most of them believed that I married a member of my class, and Adara married a member of the lower class. Our housemates, Jesse and Janice Yelland, were present. Both of them came from a family with old money and guarded their image as much as possible. Like everyone who came from an old family, they behaved in a way that showed they had power and influence, but only used it when forced to. Everything they did publicly was done with grace and class. My oldest daughter, Debbie, at 16, was going to be a rock star because of her personality. She could convince many people to do anything. I asked her to do something I thought was impossible. She was the one who convinced Janice to come, even though she knew Jesse would be in attendance. From the moment Janice appeared, dressed in a body-hugging white sleeveless dress, she had my attention. From the moment we first met, I was naturally drawn to her. With inside information about their personal situation, seeing Jesse and Janice together, one could believe that a miracle had occurred. They were a couple who were about 10 years younger than my wife and me. We thought they were both still finding their place in the world. They were both finding guidance and support from those they were closely associated with or looked up to. Unfortunately, they were to find out just how different that guidance was. Janice is a beauty, but when we first met her, she lacked a sense of self, however. Being in our neighborhood influenced her to the point where you could tell she was becoming more and more confident with each encounter. She had a personality that was simply appealing to her. As a result, she and I became close. Because of his lack of life experience, Jesse was drawn into a relationship with an older woman who manipulated him into doing her long-term favors that would make 50 Shades of Grey seem cheesy by comparison. I guess Jesse thought the woman had fallen in love with him, but he was about to find out that he wasn't the only man to find out how wrong he was. I prayed that through what happened tonight, he would begin to have an epiphany before it was too late to save himself. We were all surprised to see them together because we knew that Jesse and Janice were going through a legal separation that was looking more and more like a full-blown divorce. Nevertheless, as a couple, They were happy to see that they could cordially communicate with each other. It took Janice a few weeks to recover from his departure from their marriage because it was unexpected for Janice. Because both of our spouses were away frequently, our friendship blossomed to the point where Adara's children and my children called her auntie because of the respect they had for her. It wasn't uncommon for Janice to take it upon herself to help my daughters with feminine tasks because their mother was never around. She leaned on my shoulder as she shed tears. I loved her and felt the need to protect her. It was when I held her hand that Janice revealed to me that Jesse had always considered himself bisexual. I knew that Jesse's main problem was that he couldn't live with the guilt and shame he felt when he came home with his wife because of the new role he was in. To realize what he had gotten himself into, he needed to take his mind off the needs of his mistress. Most men can't meet the needs of one woman, and he'd been dancing between two for too long. Something had to backfire, and it was Janice who had to pay the price. I realize now that Jesse didn't know how to treat women. Jesse's mistress was an older woman, wise from life experience, and she knew how to tune him like a well-known violin. Since Jesse didn't know what some people were capable of, it was easy for her to manipulate him into being the man she wanted. For Jesse's mistress, her new position gave her something she didn't realize: power and control. Returning home from her many business trips, she could maintain the appearance of a devoted wife and mother because no one knew what was going on. Plus, she could be herself without having to put herself out there. It wasn't until recently that I learned the real reason Jesse and Janice broke up and who Jesse was seeing behind his wife's back. His affair with this lady began almost 4 years ago when he was persuaded to join her family's business organization. My wife and Jesse had had remarkably similar careers up to that point in the conglomerates their families owned or ran, and they often ran into each other while attending events their companies were involved in. During the downtime, a trusting relationship had developed between them. It also helped that she had already held some of the positions he had applied for. Both were connected to global conglomerates, so they spent a lot of time in the same circles. Her father and brothers convinced Jesse to join her organization because the families were beginning the long process of merging their similar companies. They were only weeks away from announcing a major merger that would mean billions of dollars in profits for all of them. As a result, their relationship began to grow as soon as Jesse settled into his new job. After a few weeks, Adara realized that he was a natural enough submissive to follow her into the hidden lifestyle she was beginning to explore. It was then that the seduction of Jesse's mind began. Having been an athlete throughout his studies, Jesse was still in great physical shape and good-looking. He was naturally tall and slender, which made him very attractive to many women. How Janice was able to sway him into a marriage commitment is still a mystery to all of us. We all knew that because of who he was constantly being hit on. Adair's company kept several private penthouses around the world for top executives to use when needed without too many questions. It was a gift horse that served her well. Because of the need to travel frequently, Adara had converted a penthouse in Paris into a temporary home away from home. And since it was in a society where sensual things were more open and accepted, Adara used the place to explore the darkness in her exciting new dominant side and the benefits she gained from the power and control it gave her. Adara had never considered her behavior to be addictive, but in many ways it was. All she had to do was find the weakest link and recruit it into her ever-growing army of submissive followers. Within 6 months, Adara had already gotten Jesse to share a double bed with her on a regular basis. And no one noticed the difference in their relationship because their offices were close by and they were always seen together in public. Every 2 weeks, they went off to work on improvements and streamlining to make things softer as they merged. No one knew how intense their emotional and physical relationship was becoming. Behind the scenes at this time, they had managed to acquire a controlling interest in 2 large companies that regularly supplied them with the materials they needed, thus ensuring continued steady growth at quite controllable costs. Until a week ago, I had no idea how deep it went. Only Janice had noticed slight changes in his appearance and diet. After one of his many trips back home, she learned that he had started using an expensive men's line of cosmetics. In addition, Jesse had taken up swimming and had a professional pool installed on the property so that he could take his required daily laps. It came as a complete surprise to Janice when Jesse revealed that he was going to have all of his body hair professionally removed to increase his overall swimming speed. It seemed to Janice that some of these things just didn't add up. Next chapter. An envelope addressed to me showed up in one of my firm's offices. It was large and marked private and confidential. The staff had put it aside and neglected to inform me. I asked that it be forwarded to the branch office where I worked. When I found out it had arrived, I went there to find out what it was about. At that point, I found out that it had been sitting in the branch for over a month. What was discovered inside the envelope with no return address was quite revealing. Several professionally taken photos showed my wife Adara cheating on me with some man and another woman. I would later learn that the woman's name was Jasmine and the man's name was Jesse. The person who sent the photos clearly demonstrated that this behavior has been going on for quite some time. I gathered up the photos to return them to the envelope, and then I discovered a tiny blue ONN stick. I took it to my office door and plugged it into my computer. Opening the file, I realized where the photos had come from. There was a video. A few words I'll remember until the day I die. Adara, Jasmine asked, do you still plan to stand by my side when I make Jessie my wife after you finish her training? On 2 occasions. 1, to make him my husband, Adara said, and 2, when she becomes your wife. I watched in shock, realizing that Jesse was being done on purpose. He was being groomed to be the perfect substitute. I ran the envelope and all the photos through the shredder and locked the stick in the office safe. In their own words, they proved that this relationship had been going on for a long time. That day I realized that what was left of our marriage was just a facade. It also explained why she was deliberately looking for ways to stay away from home for long periods of time. After going over everything, I called her best friend Tara because she was the premier divorce attorney for the rich and famous. For the next few days, my family felt like I was walking on red-hot lava. I did my best to keep what I knew a secret. My children couldn't understand why I was so quiet at home and also questioned my behavior when I gave directions to the household staff, but stopped when they entered the room. Next chapter. The party was almost at an end. It had been a huge success. The band hired by my wife's parents had just taken a break before starting their third and final set. My beloved wife Adara and I have always been complete opposites in everything we thought, believed, and how we lived our lives. Many who knew us for most of our lives thought we would never make it work. I met her the summer I hitchhiked across Europe while still under modern restrictions. I met her outside a Hungarian church that I was photographing because I saw it as architecturally valuable. It was so old that it still had some of the old traditional Christian symbols, long since lost, hand-carved in stone. For example, the name of God, written in the vernacular language, carved in stone above the doors of the church. Most people in modern society would not be able to understand what these letters mean because even in the Bible, the tradition of not using his name has been taken to the extreme. Modern versions deliberately removed all traces of it. The elite began to push God's name out of people's minds. She was there on vacation with her best friend, who was also in attendance. They were both free spirits back then, and to some extent still are now. Adara discovered that I didn't reveal much about myself when she knocked me down as I knelt to take an angled shot of the church they were touring. My attention was drawn to her best friend Tara because of the way she acted when Adara was trying to make sense of the mess she had made. While Adara was busting her mouth open trying to apologize, Tara was helping me gather up all the lenses that had fallen out of the case I had placed next to me. It was one of the things I found attractive about her. Once we made eye contact, there was a mutual interest. We even took the time to make sure there was no permanent damage before introducing ourselves to each other. By the end of the day, we shared a meal at an outdoor cafe in Budapest and learned that the 3 of us were attending different universities in New York. Once we got back to school, I tracked down Tara. We managed to go on a few dates before Adara found out. Adara took it as a personal challenge because she thought her best friend was flirting with her and it couldn't be allowed. Thus began our lifelong relationship. It wasn't until a year after Adara and I got married because she was carrying a baby that I realized that she had manipulated our entire relationship from day one to give her an advantage. Because of what I had learned, I began to believe that Adara had intentionally gotten pregnant and informed me first so that I would step up and marry her because of my strong sense of duty. Now Tara and I were absolutely certain that Adira and I had not slept together when Debbie was conceived. We had produced 3 children, and it had been a perfect marriage until the last 4 years. Everything was going great until her last promotion, which she accepted because our children were growing up. Now we were like 2 ships sailing through the darkness of night, and life was on a high, allowing her to develop new tastes and relationships that were more suited to the new lifestyle she had created for herself as befitted her journey through the world. Now I was eternally grateful to my father-in-law for the prenup he made me sign. It left me forever on the winning side. In a way, I was angry at myself for keeping my marriage vows, and Adara hadn't. Our 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, took the microphone during a break in the band's performance to express their warm birthday greetings and wishes. I even said a few words to thank my children and my wife's parents for organizing the surprise birthday party for Adira. I congratulated my wife for reaching another milestone in her life's journey. My wife took the microphone, already slightly tipsy. I want to thank Mom, Dad, Debbie, Deanna, and David for arranging this surprise for me. I wonder how you managed to sneak it past my husband's objections, since he has always been and still is a stick in the mud. Raymond is so outdated that he has become a mere relic because he refuses to keep up with what is considered normal in our ever-changing society. Those were the first words she said to me all evening. Knowing that things were quickly coming to an end, I brushed her off. In that moment, I fully realized how little Adara cared about me and us as a married couple. I was only needed to look after the kids while she was busy being active in the libation club. The love she had felt for me as a life partner was now long gone. There was no love, desire, or will left in her for me because of her new lifestyle. Her utter contempt for who and what I am came through loud and clear to everyone present. Even my children, who usually don't notice anything but what is in front of their eyes, looked at her with an expression on their faces that proved they had caught her thoughts in their minds. Debbie, our oldest, who had just turned 16 a few months ago, walked over to me and took my hand in hers. As we looked at each other, I caught the tears in her eyes. I knew Debbie realized that her parents' marriage was ending before her eyes. I hadn't changed, but her views of who and what I was had changed drastically over the past 4 years. I knew it was because of who and what she now regularly associates herself with and their views on life in general that had changed her. As my wife continued to talk, I used my cell phone to call the staff at our home to make sure that all of her personal belongings were packed and ready to be transported as soon as they were notified where to send them. Surprisingly, I was in a state of complete peace because I perceived what was about to happen as a release from a burden I had been carrying for far too long. The very traits of my personality that had originally attracted Adara to me, she now hated. That little impromptu speech she gave made me realize what my flaws were in her eyes. Believe me, I knew there were many. You see, I am proud of who and what I am. I am proud of my moral values and that truth and honesty still matter to me. I believe in responsibility and that the words a person speaks still mean something. I am proud to say that I believe in doing no harm to all humanity, even those I consider my enemies. All of my building design awards have been for how friendly they were to the environment. Each one was designed to leave as small a carbon footprint as possible. From my reputation, I was a leader in this field. My beliefs are what allow me to stand up for what I believe in and defend them no matter what the cost. I still believe in fair pay for an honest day's work and that everyone should be paid for their labor. I still believe that it is what I have inside that makes me the person I am, not the shell of my body that many people judge me by. I am proud to call all people, no matter their race or color, my brothers or sisters, because we all have the same Father. At this time, Tina and Tara were by my side. Tara was pleased that we were accepting of each other. I guess I better go get my paperwork and get ready for the show, Tara said with a smile. Tina, you want to come because people are starting to wonder what's going on. Tina leaned over and kissed my cheek and whispered, "Thank you, Daddy, for making this evening one I'll never forget." Janice Yelland came up to me and said, "Raymond, you handled Adara's remarks very well. I would have been furious if Jess had said what she said about me." Janice, before we got married, Adara's father made us sign a prenup, I explained. Tara, Adara's best friend, will take the microphone at my request to reveal to everyone who Adara's longtime lover is. Did you know? Janice asked. I suspected, but I didn't know who, I replied. The proof was provided to me earlier this week from a man I don't even know. When Tara saw the evidence provided to me, she volunteered to be my attorney. And that's when reality brutally slapped us both in the face. Since everything had already been planned, we felt it was the perfect place to serve them both. Janice threw me a look that made me think I should explain further, so I added, Tara and I now believe that Adara has been manipulating the two of us since we first met during university. It made us look at things in a different light. As a result, many truths have come to light. Tara, her daughter Tina and I are both looking forward to a life without Adara's influence. Leaning toward her, I whispered quietly so no one would hear. Tara and I went through our entire history and discovered that I was sleeping with her when Debbie was conceived. I'll never forget the look on Janice's face when my words reached her, and then she said, "Brilliant. Tara is known as the best divorce attorney in some areas, and she is the one handling Jesse and I's divorce. You came in tonight expecting Adara to do what she does. You give her one last yay before she takes the blame. Everyone here will feel that they have been set up by you to make fools of Adara." It was during that period that I learned that Tara, whose daughter was 17, never married because she still held a love for me. It seems we both realized too late what Adara was doing to all of us. For both of us, this was the moment we had been waiting for because her behavior freed us from the bonds we had created for ourselves. Tonight, the past and present were going to hit Adara hard. Leaving my office, Tara and I went for a long, leisurely walk to a nearby state park. We discussed all the important events that had happened to the three of us, looking at them from different perspectives. It was then that I learned about her true feelings for me. After discussing the pros and cons of starting a new relationship with each other, we decided to take a chance and see if it would grow into something more. We were still walking when a couple with kids asked us if we would take a picture of them against a railing that had an endless view of the Appalachian Mountains. We agreed. I took a few pictures, the last being a shot of a father and his two sons. My wife asked us if we had children. Tara replied, "We have 3 girls, and a boy between the ages of 13 and 17, and we are trying to decide if we want to raise a couple more." "My parents do," said the husband. "They feel like they're better parents now because their life as it is now allows them a lot more time to just be parents." That's when we started talking about having kids if we got together. We were both surprised that the other was open to it. Then I got the shock that changed my life forever when Tara said, "Besides, it's time for Tina to start getting to know the man who helped her conceive if you're ready for that." I stood there in shock, unable to speak as I comprehended the information I had received. If memory serves me correctly, that was when Adara told Tara that we had slept with each other. It wasn't true, but it was the reason we broke up. "Why didn't you tell me then?" I asked Tara, looking her straight in the eye. "She was my best friend, and she had never lied to me until that moment," Tara replied. "I had no reason not to believe her until I saw her behavior this morning. What we watched together made me look back. I realized that there were quite a few things she was misleading both of us about." At this point, we found a bench and began a long discussion about the history of the three of us, from the vacation trip where we first met to today. As we said our goodbyes, we kissed emotionally for the first time since Adara and I got engaged. It left us with a sense of what lies ahead and a new understanding of what came before us. It would be interesting to know who we were without Adara's presence in our lives. "He's here," Janice said, looking around to determine from the look on her face who Adara's lover was. "I told Jesse that I believe he is involved with another woman, and when I find out who she is, I will destroy the bitch." I watched Tara walk toward Adara and was grateful that she never married. I always felt like she would have made some lucky guy's life complete. Tara always did everything in moderation. I didn't realize right away that Tara always had to be pushed to do the wild things that my wife and her did. What I didn't notice was that Janice noticed Tara and I looked at each other. To her, it spoke volumes, though to us, it could have been just a casual act of friendship. And everything Tara did looked like an innocent caught in a situation that had gone too far. It was clear from Adara's character that she did it to see if she could pull it off and get away with it with minimal repercussions. Tara had already reached the level Adara was at, and I watched with my eldest as she asked my wife if she could let her use the microphone. The look of bewilderment on Adara's face at Tara's excitement made me smile. I noticed Tina watching me closely, standing with the rest of the kids. David and Tina were having a serious conversation. Debbie just walked over and stood next to me. Adara's mother, whom I loved dearly, was not happy with her daughter's behavior. "Debbie, you might want to go to your sister and brother to be near them because of what is about to happen." "If my thoughts are correct," Debbie replied, "Tara is your divorce attorney, and Mom is about to get sued." I nodded my head and said quietly, "And so will her longtime lover. It's time to put the facade of what's left of our marriage behind." "We all thought she might be having an affair," my daughter replied. "With her busy work schedule, she's never home. This created the perfect storm for her. My siblings and I are not impressed with this new version of our mom. It seems the virus has been a mixed blessing for her because it has allowed her to keep up appearances with an acceptable excuse." "Let your brother and sister know that I'll explain everything as soon as we get home," I said, before Debbie walked over to her grandparents and brothers. While Tara introduced herself to everyone present, I walked to the center of the room. I wanted to look my wife and her lover straight in the face as they were being served. At that moment, everyone realized something else was going on. A smug expression appeared on my face as Tara asked Jesse Yellen to join them. Janice looked at me and muttered, "Jesse is her lover?" I nodded my head affirmatively. I knew I had to keep an eye on her because Janice's face turned white. Once Jesse joined them, it took less than a minute for Tara to hand Adara and Jess the paperwork. "Congratulations, Adara. You are being served with divorce papers on the grounds of abandonment and adultery," Tara said. "It also means that our lifelong friendship is over." Turning to Jess, Tara said, "You've been served with papers and sued for interfering with the marital relationship." When Raymond showed me his evidence, we both realized you've been playing with our lives since our college years. It's time for you to pay for it by ending the game. Both of them were caught off guard. I guess neither of them believed they would be caught. As I looked around the room, I noticed the look on many people's faces. Some were in shock. Everyone seemed to quickly change their opinion of me. Adara's face turned white. I laughed until I saw Janice open the purse on her shoulder as if pulling something out. Her face reflected fury. I quickly ran over and stood in front of her. I was sure I knew what she would try to do. She was just reaching to grab the small revolver when I yanked her hand away, grabbing her wrist. "Let me go," Janice said in a loud, very frustrated voice. "I have to do this. I gave my word." Pulling her face against mine, I whispered in her ear, "Grow up. They aren't worth you losing your freedom because of the resentment, anger, and rage you feel. Believe me, Janice, I've considered destroying them both myself." At that moment, her tears receded. I pulled Janice to me and hugged her tightly, partly to make sure she didn't have a chance to reach for the gun. As I looked around the room, I realized that we were now the center of attention. My wife's parents and our 3 children were still in shock, but realized that I had prevented Janice from doing something. I began to slowly lead Janice towards the exit, realizing that I had to get her away from what was happening. There was no way I was letting her go until we were out of the conference room. Janice is an exceptionally beautiful lady, beautiful in her own way. I realized that both of our emotions and sensitivities were at breaking point. Until we both got them under control, we'd better talk as little as possible. As we slowly made our way past Adara's parents, I said, Mom, Dad, make sure the kids get home. I'll come home as soon as I get Janice calmed down. Then I'll answer your questions as best I can. Fair enough, Adara's mom said. Raymond, just so you know that from the looks of it, we don't blame you, but we do have a lot of questions. Adara's dad asked, looking at me. What was in the purse? I gave him the same answer. A gun. The look on his face spoke for itself. We were just leaving the rented room into the hallway when we split up so I could close the doors. Janice, still a little emotional, said, Thank you for not letting me dig myself a hole I can't get out of. With those words, she leaned toward me and then added, That's for you for confirming that I am still a woman that an honest man finds attractive. We walked down the hallway to the main entrance. I handed the parking clerk my car ticket stub and he quickly followed. I took a cab to get here, Janice said. Can you take me home? I'd love to, I said. But we need to make a couple stops first, if that's okay. So we did. The first stop was the office, where I left the ONN flash drive. I made 2 copies before putting the original back in the safe. I did this so that Janice would have her own proof that she could use in her divorce from Jesse. When I gave her the flash drive, I explained that what was on it explained too much, but provided more than enough evidence necessary for her to give Jesse justice. We then set off for the police station. As we pulled up, Janice said, You want me to go and turn in the gun, don't you? In the short term, I think you'd better not be tempted, I said. An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. I watched her walk into the station in the long, body-hugging white dress she'd arrived in. It made me sad that life doesn't allow us to always appreciate what we have. Janice had the kind of ass in the back that many men would be willing to die for. Her wiggling heels were a turn-on. I just wished that in time she would find the right man for the right reason. It was about 15 minutes before she walked back to my car. Once she was settled in the car and closed the door, she moved to the seat next to me. It brought back memories of when I was young. I hope no one who wasn't here tonight sees us, I said, because they'll get the wrong impression. Why do you always find something to say? Janice said with a smile. When it seems like someone needs to hear it. I started the car and pulled out. Janice pressed herself against my body as tightly as she could. I had to admit, I was flattered by her attention. I explained everything to the female officer before I handed her the revolver, Janice said. She congratulated me for taking the initiative and said she would give me a month to think about it before she sent it off to be destroyed. She remarked that you had to really like and respect me as a person to dare to do such a thing. I must admit that she is right. It took us about 45 minutes to get back to her estate. All the way back, Janice never left my shoulder. Neither of us said anything because we were both immersed in our own thoughts. As we drove past my house, I noticed that no one had come home yet. Parking the car, I walked Janice to the front door to make sure she could get in. Ray, could you come in for a minute? Janice asked. No sooner had the front door closed than Janice surprised me by turning to face me. Without saying a word, we got down to it. The next morning, we were already drinking our first cup of coffee when Janice's cell phone rang. It was hard to believe it was almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was her mother's driver calling from the closed entryway. She had flown in to be with her because she had heard the news. Opening the gate of her estate, Janice said, Mom, the timing is perfect. Can you tell everyone concerned that I was so upset that you stayed with me until we found someone who could give me the moral support I needed going forward? I think I should finish my coffee and get out of here, I said. Just remember, if you need anything, I'm here for you. Plan on me needing more of your special comfort, at least until the divorce is finalized, Janice chuckled. or until you and Tara figure out what your common interests are, whichever takes longer. That's if you're okay with it. After we parted, Janice said with a full-mouth smile, "That's the kind of answer I like. Ray, call me later so I can let you know what's going on." She was already escorting me out the door when her mother pulled up. Janice quickly explained who I was and why I was here, still dressed in my suit. And once I was done with that, I headed towards my house next door, knowing what I would have to face. I knew I had to hide my feelings. I couldn't recall a time when I had ever been so set in my ways by a woman. Janice and our love had made everything I had endured over the past 4 years worth it. Next chapter. When I got home, the first thing I knew was that Janice had called to let me know I was on my way because her mother had arrived to give her the emotional support she needed to get through this. Adira's parents, Elizabeth and Richard Drury, stayed the night. Once I was done with the greeting, I handed Richard the wand and told him to review it privately in my home office. Everyone else was gathered in the family room. I explained what Janice was going to do and told them that when she had calmed down a bit, we took the small revolver to the police station. When Richard returned, he handed me the revolver, which I put in my pants pocket. Mom, Dad, kids. As far as I've been able to find out, Adair's affair with Jesse began about 6 months after his family asked him to join the company to help find ways to make the merger of the two family conglomerates go more smoothly, I said. Records will show that even in quarantine, they lived in the same living quarters, even though they had separate residences. My mother-in-law and children seemed to accept my explanation of what was going on until my father-in-law opened his mouth. Ray is trying to protect you all, Richard said. Their behavior is worse than anything. I think I can honestly say that, given what I've just seen. If I had known what Ray knew before last night, Ray wouldn't have been able to stop me. Elizabeth looked at her husband, as if studying his face, and after a couple seconds she said, "You're serious?" "Yes, seriously," Richard said. Her behavior brought shame and reproach not only to the family, but to the corporation itself. The woman involved in the contact I saw in the video file was not the daughter we raised. I excused myself, explaining that I needed to shave and change. Deanna walked beside me as I headed for my bedroom. "We all talked last night," Deanna said. "We were all worried about you and what you were facing." "How are you? Your sister and brother dealing with it?" I asked. "I think we all realize that it's better to know than not to know," Deanna said, because a lot of questions were answered. After a heated discussion, we all agreed that Mommy left not only you, but all of us. I stopped, took my daughter in my arms and said, "I've suspected for a long time that something was going on, and just this week I got proof." "Denna, it still hurts, and it will hurt for a while until we find a way to live with this outcome." At those words, the pain, tears, and emotions she had been holding back within herself came rushing out. It is in moments like these that we learn the damage that human behavior does in tearing a family apart. I held my middle child until she calmed down. "I was the one who answered Aunt Janice's call," Deanna explained. "We talked for a while. She told me what the policeman said when she turned in the gun. Grandpa and Grandma said you put yourself at risk to protect our mom after what she did." "There was nothing wrong with what I did," I said. "Any good friend would have stopped their friends from doing something stupid because they lost control of themselves like I did." "Maybe, but in Janice's eyes you're walking on water now," Deanna said, "and probably always will." I smiled and thought about our lovemaking before answering. "Have you heard anything about your mother?" I asked. "Jesse and her left right after you," Deanna explained. "Grandpa found out from the limo driver that they went back to the airport and took the first flight out." "Why?" I asked. "Grandma told everyone that you stopped Janice from getting the gun," Deanna said. "A lot of people came up to us and asked us to pass on an apology for my behavior towards you." I smiled and explained, "No one was supposed to know that. Your grandmother wasn't supposed to tell you about it." "But it was true," said Deanna. "Yeah, but mostly it doesn't matter," I said. "It rarely matters. Rather, the gossip turned her into something she never was. That's how the tabloids we see in grocery stores make money. They turn the truth into something it isn't, and most readers believe it. That's what Mom did to all of us, isn't it, Dad? Said Dina sadly. What's even sadder is that her behavior shows that in her eyes, none of us were worth telling the truth, I said. Yet there was nothing socially objectionable about their behavior. When Grandpa said you were protecting all of us, Dina asked, was he telling the truth? You're too young to tell you all the details, I said. But what your mother did to Jessie wouldn't look serious in a 50 Shades of Grey movie. Grandma won't even talk about or watch this movie, Deanna says. According to her, it's humiliating, demoralizing. And the difference between people's views on this movie depends on their personal ideas about morality, I said. Some believe in them and live with them, some don't. Anything else I should know about, I added. Tara and then Tina called and asked if I'd heard from you, Deanna added. Both expressed their concern. Do me a favor and call one of them to let them know I'm okay, I said. And let them know I'll call them tonight. Tina asked a lot of questions about you, first to David last night and then to Debbie when she called earlier, Deanna said. So many that it makes us wonder. I think I know why, and I promise you'll get answers that will explain everything, I said. When everything in front of our eyes settles down. Next chapter. Since I'd gotten home on Saturday, the house had been quiet. I was grateful for that because it gave me and my kids time to adjust. Janice and I had chatted a couple times, and she made me promise to come over as soon as her mother left. Tina and I had arranged a private lunch on Friday because it was only half day at school, and I was looking forward to it. I couldn't help but wonder how our lives would have turned out if Adara hadn't intervened. Making love to Janice will long remain one of my favorite memories. Janice, in a way, gave me back a part of me that I thought I might have lost. My faith in myself. And I took the first 2 workdays off to make sure I was there for those who needed me at home. Each of my children needed some time to themselves. I was grateful that I had the wisdom to help them deal with their emotions. This morning I called a general meeting with the staff to catch up. Ray, is Isabel Rosing there? Who would like to speak to you if you're free? My secretary asked, poking her head through the door. Give me a minute to clean up and sit down at my desk before you escort her out, I replied. I wondered who it could be because I had never heard the name before. So when I heard them walking down the hallway, I stood up. As soon as the woman walked in, I recognized her as Janice's mother. Nah, if you were to look at Janice and her mother, you would realize that they are related. Even though they had different hair colors, there were enough traits in them to make that claim, because their build, looks, and mannerisms left no doubt. Both were very attractive women in their own ways. It's nice to meet you again, I said, extending my hand to her. She took it and said, Thank you for meeting me and for what you have done for my only daughter. I'm heading to the airport to board the private jet I booked and wanted to talk to you before boarding. How is Janice doing? I asked with interest. I haven't spoken to her since late Sunday. She's come to terms with it all and is adjusting well. When I arrived, she was in better spirits than I expected, Isabel said. Primarily because you took the time to let her know that she wasn't a failure and wasn't to blame for what happened. Thank you for your kind comments, I said. What can I do to help you today? First of all, Janice and I looked at the file you provided her. Frankly, we were both shocked, dismayed, and upset by what we found there. It will serve her well in the divorce. Janice wondered if she had been too blind to see what Jesse wanted, and if the reason he married her was because he needed a shield. This led to a long conversation between my daughter and me. We talked about everything from her future life to her relationship with you, and it brought us closer than we had ever been since she was a teenager. My face must have reflected my reaction because she said, Relax, Mr. Wright. We're both adults. Let me explain a few things. I have 3 children, 2 sons, and an only daughter, all with one father whom I never married. We started our relationship as friends with benefits. Their father and I are still in a loving relationship that we are comfortable with. He is also about 10 years older than me. Getting curious, I realized the conversation was going to be long, so I asked the receptionist to bring coffee. Our family originally lived in Sweden, but now we, like most families, are scattered all over the world, Isabel explained. Because of a failed first marriage and our family's wealth, I decided it was better to never remarry. That's understandable, I replied, especially when you're dealing with something like your daughter and I are. We both live individual lives, layered and complicated, but aren't all relationships similar in some way? Asked Isabel. You're not going to have an argument for me, I said. I've always assumed that what you do behind closed doors is nobody's business but the people who live behind those doors. Janice's mother seemed to like my words, because I could tell by her demeanor that she was beginning to relax and feel comfortable around me. In order to thank you properly, the family decided it would be best to do a background check on you. Let me tell you that the information they have received about you has made a great impression on them. Both professionally and personally, you have a brilliant record, Isabel explained proudly. Expect a phone call within the next week requesting that your firm submit a proposal to design a new museum for the city of Stockholm, which we are sponsoring. Thank you for the honor and please call me Ray, I said, as the receptionist brought in a tray of coffee. I'm sure when I get the request, they'll give me the general details of what it will be used for. As we were served and she left, closing the door behind her, it got interesting. The other woman in the video file is a distant third cousin whom Janice has never met. I was able to identify Jasmine by her voice. Let me make it clear that the family will treat her accordingly once they review the file I emailed to them, Isabel stated. Everything will be done to ensure that she never becomes a problem for my daughter or you, as you intend to do in the future. Pausing, Isabel continued. Even among those who are considered elite, there is order. There are things that are not considered acceptable once they come into the public eye. As a result, there are some rather harsh methods of dealing with those deemed undesirable. Thank you, that's good to hear, I said. To be honest, I hadn't really thought about Jasmine, other than the fact that she will be another advantage for me in the custody battle. Isabel smiled because she apparently realized that my children's needs always came first for me and always would. Janice has become independent, and I think that is primarily due to your long-developing relationship with her, Isabel said honestly. I am immensely proud of the person she has become. Her confidence has come to the forefront during this time, and it shows. She's a very sweet woman who I love dearly. Even my 3 children adore her, I said. Janice knows that she is a close friend to me and my children. So much so that my kids call her Auntie. I'm well aware of that and what went on before I arrived, including the status of your relationship, Isabel said. Right down to the fact that you helped her deal with the shock she was in. I blushed. Isabel smiled and said, Janice said you were a humble man. I can see that she's right. This just confirms how well you two know each other. This is my way of letting you know that I approve of any relationship between my daughter and you. Thank you. That means a lot, I replied. If things work out the way I want them to, Isabel said with a smile. I hope that in the future, she'll come to visit with a full-time nanny and a couple of the babies you've raised, and you'll keep a close eye on her. I laughed because the lady could be brutally frank, and that was refreshing. I liked the lady, so I asked her, Do you have time to dine with me at the club? The pilot is used to waiting for me to arrive, so I have all the time in the world, said Isabel. An hour or 2 won't add much to the cost. I quickly called the club's restaurant to make a reservation, and we were on our way. While Isabel was instructing the limo driver, I called Janice and asked if she wanted to join me. Janice was already waiting for us when we arrived. Mom, said Janice with a slight reproach, I asked you not to get involved. Isabel laughed and smiled before saying, I just stopped to let Ray know that he's been offered to go international. Of course you were offered, Janice said. If I ask Ray if you two have talked about kids, what will he say? Not a word, I replied, because I'm not going to get dragged into this. Both Janice and Isabel laughed. Mom, I told you what he's like, Janice said with a smile. He's very careful about everything he says. Most thinking men are like that, Isabel said. When things go to hell, it's men like him who stay on their feet. With him, you'll always know where you stand because, like it or not, He'll be straightforward and honest. With those words, we headed for the clubhouse. Lunch was, surprisingly, a great success. Isabel liked the quality food and the atmosphere of the restaurant. Janice was pleased to see that her mother and I were beginning to develop a relationship. Before leaving through security, kissing us goodbye on the cheek, Isabel said, "I expect to see you two when Ray is doing a spot check of the museum building. Janice let me know in advance so I can arrange for your father's presence." We went back to the clubhouse to get her car, and I followed her to her house. As soon as we walked in the front door, Janice said, "I sent you the program that opens and closes the gate. The house key is on the kitchen table. Mom and I changed everything while she was here. All of Jesse's personal belongings have been put in public storage." Once we reached the kitchen, I hung the house key on my keychain. I started rinsing the coffee pot, and together we put it on to boil. As I sat down at the kitchen table, Janice heated the coffee cups. She unbuttoned her blouse and pulled it out of her pants. As I turned my chair to the side, she walked over and slipped out of her shoes and sat on my lap. "Thanks to you, mister," Janice said as she kissed me. "My mom will call me every week to see if you've gotten me to the point where my body is changing shape." "Your father doesn't limit his relationship with your mother?" I asked, thinking about what Tara and I had agreed on. "My father is married," Janice explained. "He was the older brother of my mother's first husband, so everything is done carefully. Like my mother, his family is also of an ancient lineage. He is a member of the House of Bernadotte and is part of the Swedish royal family. I believe he is 10th in line for the crown." "That explains something," I said. "I told your mother that what goes on behind closed doors is nobody's business but the people who live behind those doors." Janice got up and poured us coffee. After making the coffee, she came back with it and sat on my lap. "My mom and I did some research on the internet about my breastfeeding and found out that some women can start it at the time of conception," Janice explained, smiling broadly. "You're not on birth control," I said. "Not since Jesse and I broke up, no," Janice giggled. Janice looked me in the eye, and I could see how excited she was about the possibility of us having a baby. "Said, what are you hoping for if it's confirmed that you're pregnant?" I asked. "My mom wants a girl since both of my brother's wives have boys," Janice said. "I don't care as long as she's healthy." "And we'll have to decide what to name him before he's born," I said. "No, we won't have to, because when I talked to a divorce lawyer, I learned that legally I can change my last name to anything I want," she said. "So I'm going to change mine to Wright." I smiled, because I knew she wasn't going to get married, and neither was I yet. We both had a lot of things to sort out. "Between you and me, the reason Tara's daughter spent so much time with me Friday night," I said. "It's because earlier in the week, Tara revealed that I'm her father." Janice paused for a few minutes, digesting the information, and said, "If you hadn't gotten proof of Adira and Jesse's behavior, you never would have known." "Right, because it took Tara seeing that video to realize that Adira had cheated on her back in her college years," I explained. "That led to us spending the day re-watching it to identify all of her deceptions over the years." "That explains the look I saw between you two," Janice said. "Does that mean Tara wants to reunite after all these years?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, "because the emotions are still too raw. Tara and I still have a friendly relationship, but I'm not sure what it will be like until things settle down." "So where does that leave us?" asked Janice. "Where we are," I replied. "Our relationship came about because of what Adira and Jesse did with us. Our love, friendship, and trust in each other is strong and growing stronger every day." Apparently, I said all the right things because Janice got up off my lap and directed us to our bedroom, as she put it. There, she showed me my new closet and dresser for clothes. "Thanks to cable television, social values are changing in America," Janice remarked. "Promise me you'll keep an open mind about what Tara and I want, because we both want a father in our children's lives." Next chapter. It had been a month since Adara had been sued, and the announcement of the successful merger was published in this morning's New York Times. What caught my eye was that Adara and Jess's names were not on the list of new management. When I called to congratulate my father-in-law, Richard told me that Adira and Jesse were still employed by the conglomerate, but were assigned to run one of the subsidiaries. This suggested that their careers and futures were at a standstill. At this time, it was confirmed that Janice was indeed carrying our first child. Tina and I became close, and she was going to be an intern, working in a local office over the summer. Tara had already guessed what was going on between Janice and I because Janice asked her about the last name change. Tara and I honestly tried to make a relationship work, but soon realized we had too much baggage because of being involved with Adira for so long. She wanted another child. According to state law, all 3 of my children have been interviewed by state services. All 3 will stay with me. At a family meeting, I told my parents, in-laws, Adira's children, and my children that Tina was my daughter. I had to explain how it happened. It was hard for all of them to know that Adira's deception had gone on for so long. Richard and I were walking around the estate. He wanted to know how things were going with the divorce and if there was anything he could do to get his daughter to speed up the process. It was then that he learned that there was a very strong possibility that my oldest Debbie was not my daughter. It took 3 months for my divorce from Janice to be finalized, and I think Richard and Jesse's family got involved. In the end, we both ended up benefiting as we put both of our estates up for sale. We both felt it was time for a fresh start. Thankfully, she didn't show because we were on our way to Stockholm. My in-laws would watch the kids for a month while I would oversee the start of the museum construction. My house wasn't the cheapest, but it was chosen because the design matched the city and left the least carbon footprint. Richard promised to oversee the construction of our new home. Before we set off on our trip, I invited the kids over to get their blessing. All 3 were excited about what I wanted to do. We flew in and were greeted by Isabel and her 2 sons. We stayed there for about a week before we had the opportunity to walk Crown Princess Victoria and Prince Daniel's Karlexstig. It was a walking trail in the western part of Isbladskareta, between the Gjordardsbrunn Canal and the pumping station in the south of Isbladskareta. As we were enjoying the day, I got down on one knee and asked Janice to marry me. Janice wasn't expecting it, but thankfully didn't hesitate. I think it took less than 10 seconds before she squeaked out a yes. I'll be honest, those were emotional minutes for her. As soon as I put the ring on her finger, she showered me with kisses. At 7 p.m. local time, using my cell phone, we called the kids in the presence of Janice's parents. The way we broke the news to them was perfect. Debbie put us on speakerphone so we could speak to all 3 as I did on my end. Your dad and I wanted to ask Debbie and Deanna if you would do us the honor, Janice said, by agreeing to be my bridesmaids. Isabel and Sven were caught off guard, so much so that Isabel cried. Of course, this raised 1,000 questions that we didn't have answers for, and we had to promise to let them know as soon as we worked something out. When things had calmed down, Janice told Isabel that she was going to have the granddaughter she had always dreamed of. It was while in Stockholm that we learned that Adira Wright, Jasmine, and Jesse Yelland were missing at sea and that the authorities were searching for their plane. I was reminded of Isabel's promise. We learned that Adira survived, but ended up spending a month on a local fishing boat. We don't know what happened, but she came back a broken person and retired to a quiet life in the Keys in Florida. It was in the fall, the last part of September, when Janice and I had our wedding. Tina, Debbie, and Deanne were bridesmaids. David, my son, and my brother's 2 sons, both a little older, stood by my side. Isabel, Sven, and all of her family members were present. Isabel held her 1-month-old granddaughter Issy in her arms the entire time. The marriage ceremony took place on a patch of lawn on our new estate. Adira was present at the ceremony. I involuntarily remembered Debbie and Denna talking about their mother, who now had to use a cane regularly. Mom made decisions in her life assuming she would have it all, Denna said. She never thought karma would have its say. True, but if you compare our parents, Debbie replied. Karma gave them back what they both deserved. The end. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.